only planned to stay there for one night, just a temporary cabin rental on my way home, in the middle of winter, right before a major blizzard moved in. I checked the weather forecast. I told myself I was being careful. I thought the worst thing I had to worry about was snow and icy roads. I was wrong. My name is Evan. I was 29 years old at the time. This happened in late January, about 2 years ago. I was driving alone, heading back to the city where I worked. I didn't want to do the entire drive in one go, so I booked a remote cabin for the night. One of those places deep in the woods, far from towns, advertised as quiet and disconnecting. The host sent me one message that stuck with me. If the storm gets bad, don't try to leave. I replied politely, I'll only be there for one night. I thought that would be the end of it. I left the main highway close to 11 p.m. The sky was heavy and dark, and snow had already started falling. At first, the flakes were small, sharp, almost like sand in the wind. The forest road was empty. No houses, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting into darkness. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then disappeared completely. When I saw the sign for a gas station ahead, I felt relieved. I was used to driving at night, but I wasn't used to feeling like I was completely alone in the world. The gas station sat beside a small convenience store. Cold fluorescent lights, white tile floors, the kind of place that feels colder inside than it does outside. There were no customers, just a cashier behind the counter, staring at a screen. I grabbed a coffee, some batteries, instant noodles, and something sweet to keep me awake. And that's when I noticed her, a woman standing near the back aisle. Dark winter coat, a knit hat pulled low over her eyes. She wasn't holding a basket. She wasn't on her phone. She was just standing there, waiting. At least, that's what it felt like. I tried not to think too much about it. Gas stations attract all kinds of people at night, but while I waited at the register, I caught her reflection in the glass door of a refrigerator. She hadn't moved. 5 minutes passed, then 7. I remember counting, because the heater hummed loudly, and every time the automatic doors opened, cold air rushed in, and a bell chimed. No one came in. No one left. Except me. I walked out into the cold, snow stinging my face. I loaded my things into the car and sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, I glanced around the parking lot. Habit. The kind you don't realize you have. There were maybe a dozen cars, mostly trucks, and then I saw her again. She was standing outside the store, under the awning. Still empty-handed, her head was slightly down, but I could feel it. She was watching me. I backed out of the spot. As I turned, I noticed a dark-colored sedan parked in a corner of the lot, somewhere you couldn't easily see from inside the store. The lights were off, and the car was pointed in the same direction I was about to go. I told myself it meant nothing. I pulled onto the road. A few minutes passed. Then, in my rearview mirror, 2 headlights appeared through the falling snow. They stayed far enough back not to seem obvious, not tailgating, not passing. Just there. I slowed down. The car slowed down. I sped up. The car sped up. I told myself we were probably heading the same way, but I knew the turn I was about to take. It wasn't a road you accidentally drove down. When I reached it, I turned onto the forest road. For a moment, the headlights didn't follow. Primera, exhalet. And then, less than a minute later, they appeared again behind me. I arrived at the cabin at 12:12 a.m. I remember the time because I stared at the dashboard longer than usual. The cabin was small. Old wood, a weak yellow porch light swaying in the wind. No neighbors. No road noise. Just trees. I carried my bags inside and locked the door. The cabin was warm, at least. There was electric heat and a few lamps. My phone showed no signal. The Wi-Fi instructions didn't work. Outside, the wind howled louder. Snow hammered against the windows. I pulled the curtain aside, and that's when I saw the car. The same dark sedan, parked near the tree line. Lights off, far enough away to pretend it didn't matter, close enough to make my stomach drop. The host had written, "There are no nearby neighbors." I turned off most of the lights inside. I didn't want the cabin glowing like a lantern in the woods. I checked every door, every window. Locked. I sat on the couch, still wearing my jacket, trying to stay calm. About an hour later, the power flickered and went out completely. The cabin fell into darkness. I grabbed the flashlight from a drawer. Its beam shook slightly in my hand. The car was still there. No movement. No sound. And then I heard it. A soft noise, not wind, not branches. Something touching wood. Another sound followed. Closer. Footsteps. On the porch, slow. Careful. No knock. No voice. Just presence. I tried calling 911. No signal. I stood frozen behind the thin cabin wall, listening as someone tested the space around me. Then silence. Long enough that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything, until I heard metal scrape against metal, the shed door being touched. Minutes later, footsteps again, faster this time. Running, and through the storm. Barely audible, an engine. The person outside reacted instantly. The porch creaked, snow crunched, the sedan's lights flashed on briefly, then off again. The car disappeared into the trees. Rescue workers arrived later, checking the area after a power alert. They found faint boot prints near the porch and marks on the shed door. When I mentioned the gas station, one of them looked at me for a long moment. "Do you remember her face?" he asked. I nodded. He showed me a blurry photo on his phone. I recognized her immediately. "She shows up in places like that," he said. "Late at night, winter storms. People alone." I left the cabin as soon as the road was passable. I didn't ask why she chose me. I already knew the answer. She saw me at the gas station, and she knew the blizzard would take care of the rest. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 34 years old when this happened. This took place in February 2023, during a winter storm that hit Itasca County in northern Minnesota harder than anyone expected. I wasn't on vacation. I wasn't looking for isolation. I just needed a place to stop. I had finished a short work contract in Duluth and was driving back south when the weather warnings escalated. What started as a snow advisory quickly turned into travel warnings. I didn't want to push my luck, so I booked the first available cabin I could find. The listing emphasized 3 things. Remote, no neighbors, no cell service. At the time, that sounded manageable. I turned off the main highway just after 6:30 p.m. Snow was already blowing sideways through the trees. The radio crackled with alerts about road closures spreading across the region. I remember thinking I'd made the right decision by stopping early. The cabin appeared suddenly through the snow, a dark shape with a single porch light glowing weakly. Everything else was swallowed by white. I parked close to the steps and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't the cold either. Not the kind of cold you expect from a cabin that's been empty for weeks. The air felt settled, like the heat had been turned down recently, not shut off. I noticed that, and I wish I hadn't. I locked the door and did a quick walkthrough. One mine room, a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and a narrow staircase leading up to a low attic loft used for storage. No bed up there, just boxes and old furniture. Everything looked normal. Outside, the storm intensified quickly. By 8 p.m., visibility was nearly gone. Snow pressed against the windows. My phone lost signal completely, and the Wi-Fi never connected. I ate a simple dinner, sat by the window, and listened to the wind hit the cabin from all directions. The sound was constant and dull, like the world had been wrapped in insulation. The first night passed without incident. No knocks, no footsteps, no movement. I slept on the couch with my boots nearby. I woke up around 7 a.m. to a strange stillness. The storm hadn't ended, but it had eased. Snow continued to fall, softer now, the kind of quiet that follows something violent. I pulled back the curtain. Snow had buried everything. The porch railing was nearly covered. My car was just a rounded mound with mirrors sticking out. Then I saw the footprints. They circled the cabin. Heavy boot prints. Deep tread, larger than mine. They went up the porch steps, paused near the door, then continued around the building. After that, they led away into the yard. That alone was unsettling. What made my chest tighten was what wasn't there. There were no tracks leading toward the cabin. No path from the road, no approach from the trees. Just footprints around the cabin, and then a trail heading away, as if someone had started at my door and walked out into the snow. I stood there trying to explain it. Wind can erase tracks. Snow drifts quickly. I knew that. Still, I couldn't picture how someone could reach the cabin without leaving any trace behind. I stepped outside briefly to look closer. The cold hit instantly. The prints were already softening at the edges, disappearing. I went back inside and locked the door. That's when I noticed the thermostat. It was set higher than I remembered, only by a few degrees. But I was sure. I lowered it again and told myself I was reading too much into things. The day dragged on. No phone service, no usable radio signal. Snow kept falling steadily. I moved around just to stay occupied. At one point, I realized my food supplies on the counter had been shifted. Nothing missing. Just moved. I assumed I had done it. By nightfall, the temperature outside dropped sharply. The cabin creaked as the wood contracted. I went to bed early again, but sleep didn't come easily. Sometime after midnight, I heard a sound. Not loud, a soft scraping, like wood against wood. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. Then it happened again. Slow, controlled a chair. Being moved, not dragged, adjusted. I waited for footsteps, for breathing, for anything that would confirm I wasn't alone. Eventually, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I checked the cabin again. Everything looked normal, except the thermostat. It had been adjusted again during the night, and the chair at the table wasn't where I'd left it. That's when I checked the attic. The stairs creaked as I climbed. The loft smelled like dust and old wood. And something else. Something human. One of the old blankets had been pulled from a box. It was flattened, creased in the way fabric gets after weight is pressed into it. There was an impression. Someone had been lying there. I backed down the stairs slowly. I didn't want to stay another night. But the radio alert confirmed what I already suspected. The access road was closed. Snowplows wouldn't reach this area until the next day. I was stuck. That night, I set up the porch camera using a battery pack. It wasn't designed for extreme cold, but it was all I had. I locked myself in the bedroom and waited. At 4 a.m., the camera sent a motion alert. The footage was grainy. Snow blowing across the lens. Then a figure stepped into view. An adult. Thin. Moving stiffly. No coat. No hat. Just boots and dark clothing. The person stepped off the porch and walked straight into the storm. No hesitation. No rush. Who's leaving? Police reached the cabin late the next afternoon. They listened carefully. Checked the attic. The porch. The surrounding area. When I described the blanket, one officer nodded slowly. He told me cabins like this are sometimes used as shelter during severe winter storms. People enter before renters arrive. Hide. Stay out of sight. I asked how long he thought the person had been there. He paused. Then he said, "Probably before you showed up." I asked if they had left for good. He looked toward the trees and said, "Maybe. Maybe not." I packed up and left as soon as the road reopened. I don't stay in remote cabins during winter anymore. Not because of storms, but because sometimes you're not the only one waiting them out.
Want to hear more stories like this? Hit follow. The night isn't over yet.